Welcome to HFY Beyond Terra, where humanity doesn't just survive, it becomes the galaxy's biggest surprise. Subscribe, and let's go beyond Terra.
The first scream came out of her like a thrown stone. Not loud at first, more surprise than pain. Then it caught itself in her throat and turned into a sound that made the crows in the dead oak scatter. She lay half in shadow, half in sun, at the base of the ravine where the rainwater carved narrow paths through clay. One leg was folded beneath her at an angle legs were not meant to fold. Her fingers clawed the dirt as if she could dig her way out of the ache. Elias slid down after her, boots skidding, hands out to catch himself on scrub and rock. He told her to stay behind. He told her the ravine was soft after storm season, the edges deceptive. She had gone anyway. Because pride, because anger, because she was tired of being treated like something that needed warning labels. Now her silver hair, more white than silver in the sun, was matted with mud and leaf rot. Her ears, too sharp for any human face, flattened tight against her skull. When she tried to sit up, her breath came in a hiss and her eyes went wide, black irises swallowing the gray. "Don't move," Elias said, already crouching. His voice stayed steady the way he'd learned to keep it when animals panicked. Steady was safer than soothing. Soothing invited hope, and hope made people do foolish things. "I'm not," she choked on the next word as she looked down. The angle stole it from her. Her hands flew to her leg. The moment her fingers made contact, she jerked away as if the pain had teeth. "Don't touch it," he said again, softer now because it wasn't a command anymore. It was a plea. She looked up at him with fury so bright it felt like heat off a forge. "You," she spat as though the syllable itself tasted of rust. "You did this." "I didn't push you," he said. "You led me here." Her voice shook on the words. "You trapped me here." Elias opened his mouth to answer and shut it. Arguing would be easy. Winning would be easy, even. He could list all the times he'd offered to carry her, the times he'd warned her. He could point out that she'd climbed the ridge like she was invincible. None of that would straighten her bone. He shifted closer, careful to keep his hands visible. "Let me see." No. It was the same no she'd given him the first night he'd found her in the snare, thin wire, rabbit trap, human cruelty with no face attached. She'd been sitting perfectly still as if stillness could make the pain smaller, blood soaking the moss. When he'd reached for the wire cutters, she'd tried to bite him. That no had come with feral terror. This no came with something worse, humiliation. Elias looked at the slope above them. Getting her out of the ravine would be hard even if she could walk. Leaving her here was impossible. The sun was already sliding, and the cold would drop fast when it did. Wolves came closer when dusk thickened. He took a slow breath. "All right," he said. "Then I'll tell you what I see, and you can decide." She glared like she wanted to decide he didn't exist. He extended one finger, not touching, just pointing. "Your lower leg here below the knee looks like the bone's displaced. It's probably the tibia, maybe the fibula too." He swallowed. "If it stays like that, the sharp end can cut vessels. You can lose the foot." Her eyes flickered. Fear slipped through the cracks of anger like water through stone. "I won't," she said, but it wasn't conviction. It was bargaining with reality. "I don't have splints," he said, thinking of his pack-up on the ridge, thinking of the fact that even if he did, a splint without alignment was a pretty lie. "No bandages, no painkillers, just my hands." That made her look at his hands. Human hands, broad palms, blunt fingers, nails bitten short. Hands that built fences and skinned deer, and once, long before he'd come to this borderland, held his sister's wrist while a doctor pulled her elbow back into place. She flinched away from the memory his hands seemed to carry. "You'll break me," she said, voice dropping. I'm trying to unbreak you. A bitter laugh escaped her half-sob. That's what monsters say. Elias let the words hit him. He didn't defend himself. He didn't tell her he'd been called worse. He didn't tell her that in the village downriver, mothers dragged their children indoors when he walked past because he lived too close to the forest edge and did not go to church. He kept his eyes on her leg instead because that was the honest problem. Listen, he said. It's going to hurt, I won't lie, but it's going to hurt more later if we don't, and if you pass out from shock, I can't carry you alone. She swallowed. Her throat bobbed like a trapped thing. Alone, she echoed, and something in her face twisted as though the word had snagged an old wound. He could have asked then, where are your people? Why are you alone? But time was a chain tightening. Her skin had already gone damp and pale. Elias reached into the grass beside him and pulled out a long strip of vine thick enough not to snap. He held it up. Bite this, her lip curled. No. Then bite me, he said. That stopped her. He didn't mean it as a joke. Jokes were for after. Eyes darted to his forearm. He rolled his sleeve up. There were old scars there, pale ladder marks from brambles, and one crescent-shaped one from her teeth the first night. He offered the same arm again like an oath. I won't, she whispered, suddenly smaller. You might, he said. It's fine. It's not, she snapped, anger flaring to hide the smallness. It's not fine that you think hurting is nothing. Elias' mouth went tight. I don't think it's nothing, I think it's the price. A price you don't pay. Her gaze cut like flint. He looked at her, really looked, and saw the tremor in her hands. She was paying already in sweat and fear and the indignity of being forced to accept help. Elias placed the vine on a rock within her reach. If you change your mind, it's there. Then, slowly, he positioned himself at her side. I'm going to stabilize above the break. I need to move your foot. She went rigid. Don't touch me. I have to, he said, and hated how the words sounded. Like ownership. Like all the stories she'd probably been raised on. He lowered his hands to hover, giving her one more heartbeat to object. Her jaw clenched. Do it, she spat as if daring him. Elias' hands made contact, one just below her knee, firm but not crushing, the other around her heel, fingers wrapping carefully, feeling the unnatural slack where bone should have been a steady pillar. Her breath came fast. If you make it worse, I'll stop, he said. You can't stop halfway, she hissed. You humans always stop halfway. You leave things half done and call it mercy. Elias paused. Is that what happened to you? Her eyes widened, and he knew he'd stepped on something tender. Don't, she said, but the word was already too late. It was out there between them, trembling like a thread. Elias swallowed his questions. There was a time for them later, if later existed. He braced his elbow against his own knee, creating leverage. He remembered the doctor's hands on his sister, confident, swift. The doctor had said, on 3. Not because 3 was magical, but because it gave the patient a small illusion of control. Elias looked at her face. On 3, he said. She laughed, sharp and broken. You think I need counting? It helps, he said. Maybe not you, but it helps me. Her eyes narrowed. Afraid? Yes, he said simply. I don't want to hurt you, but I will. Silence cracked. Somewhere above, water dripped from a root, a slow metronome. She turned her head away, staring at the clay wall of the ravine like it had answers written in it. Do it. Elias tightened his grip. He breathed in slow to keep his hands from shaking. 1, he said, her fingers dug into the dirt. 2, her shoulders rose, bracing, her ears flattened. 3, he pulled. Not violently, not the dramatic yank of stories, but with decisive force, stretching the muscles that had spasmed, aligning the jagged ends. His hand at her knee held steady so the movement happened where it needed to happen and nowhere else. Her scream this time was not a thrown stone. It was a blade. It cut the air, the ravine, his chest. It made his hands want to let go. It made something ancient in him recoil from causing that sound. Then came the sickening little shift, less a snap than a wet click as bone slid back toward its proper place. Her head slammed back against the dirt. Her eyes rolled, and for a heartbeat Elias thought she'd fainted. Then she sucked in a breath like she'd been underwater. Her gaze found him blazing with hatred and shock and a kind of betrayal so pure it almost looked like grief. "You monster!" she cried, voice ragged. "You monster!" Elias kept his hands in place because letting go too soon would undo everything. His own breathing was loud in his ears. "It's in," he said, though the words felt inadequate as prayer. "Get off me!" She twisted, instinctively trying to pull away, and pain ripped through her again. She shrieked and collapsed, trembling. "Stop," Elias said, firmer now. "Stop moving." She stared at him as if she'd never seen him before. "You hurt me." "Yes," he said, "I did." "How can you?" Her voice broke. "How can you do that? How can you choose that?" Elias looked down at his hands on her leg. His fingers were smeared with her blood, mud, sweat. His palms were steady only because he forced them to be. "I didn't choose to hurt you," he said. "I chose to keep you from losing your leg." She laughed again, but now it was wet. Tears cut clean lines through the dirt on her cheeks. "You choose words like nets. You wrap them around me until I can't tell where I am." Elias felt the sting of that. Because he knew nets. He knew how humans caught things and then called it survival. He reached for the vine again. "Bite this, please." She looked at it like it was an insult, then like it was salvation. Her pride fought her, and pride was losing. Finally, she snatched it and shoved it between her teeth, jaw clenched so hard her cheek muscles jumped. Elias shifted his packless resources. He needed a splint. He needed something to immobilize. He scanned the ravine floor. There were fallen branches, some straight enough. He crawled away from her for a moment, keeping one hand lightly on her shin as if tethering her to the present, and grabbed 2 lengths of wood. He snapped off smaller twigs, stripped leaves with his knife. He had a knife, at least. When he returned, her eyes followed him with suspicion, even as her body sagged with exhaustion. The vine was still between her teeth, saliva soaking it dark. "I'm going to splint it," he said. "Keep it from shifting." "You have no tools," she mumbled around the vine. "These are tools," he said, holding up the branches. "Just not the kind you like." Her eyes narrowed, but she didn't argue. Maybe she couldn't. He slid one branch along the outside of her leg from knee to ankle, careful not to jostle, then the other along the inside. He tore his shirt, his only spare, but cloth was cloth, into strips. As he wrapped, he felt her tremors lessen. The leg held firm looked less wrong. Still swollen, still angry, but no longer grotesque. When he tied the last knot, he leaned back on his heels. His hands were shaking now that the urgent work was done. She pulled the vine from her mouth slowly. Her lips were bloodless. "You enjoy it," she whispered. Elias' head snapped up. "What?" "The hurting," she said, voice thick with accusation. "You enjoy that you can do it and I can't stop you." Elias stared at her, and for a moment he saw the world through her eyes. A human crouched over her, larger, stronger, doing something to her body while she screamed. The fact that it was medical wouldn't matter in that picture. The fact that he meant well wouldn't erase how it felt. He took a careful breath. "No," he said, "I don't enjoy it." "You didn't hesitate." "I did," he said, "inside." She gave a short, disbelieving sound. "Inside is where humans keep their lies." The words landed like stones. Elias could have snapped back, could have told her she was the one lying to herself about needing no one, but he didn't. He'd already used force. He wouldn't use cruelty, too. He looked away up at the ridge. "We need to move," he said. "I'm going to make a drag, get you to my cabin." "Cabin," she repeated, and there was the smallest quiver of fear. "You've been there before," he reminded her. "You stole my bread." "I borrowed it," she muttered, but the attempt at banter died. Her eyes fixed on the trees. "You'll lock me in." "I don't have locks," he said. "You have doors." Elias nodded once, conceding that doors were still barriers even without iron. "I'll leave it open," he said. "If you want to crawl out into the snow, that's your choice." Her mouth tightened. "You say choice like you invented it." Elias didn't answer. He began gathering long sticks and more vine. He worked fast, hands moving automatically, making a simple sled. 2 poles, crossbars, woven with vines and his torn cloth. It wasn't elegant, it was enough. While he worked, she watched him with an intensity that made his skin prickle, like she was memorizing him for a story she might tell later, like she was trying to locate the seam where a man became a monster. When the drag was ready, he slid it beside her. "I'm going to lift you," he said. "It will hurt again." Her eyes closed. Her throat worked. "Do it," she whispered, but now it wasn't a dare, it was surrender. Elias slid one arm behind her shoulders, the other under her knees, careful to keep the splinted leg straight. She inhaled sharply as he lifted. Her fingers fisted in his shirt, not to hold on but to anchor herself against the wave of pain. He set her onto the drag. She bit her lip so hard a bead of blood appeared. "Monster," she breathed, not with the same fire as before. This time the word was tired. Almost confused, Elias crouched beside her. "Say my name," he said quietly, her eyes opened, startled. "What? Say my name," he repeated. "Not what you think I am, just my name." She stared at him as if the request was another trap. Names had power, names made things real. "I don't know it," she lied. "You do," he said. "You heard it in the village." Her jaw clenched. She looked away, then back, like she was stepping across a line. "Elias," she said, and the syllables sounded strange in her mouth, as if human language bruised her tongue. He exhaled, something loosened in his chest. "Thank you," her eyes flashed. "Don't thank me, you're not kind, you're—" She searched for the word, and it hurt to not find it. "You're human." Elias almost smiled, almost. "Yes," he said, "and sometimes that means doing ugly things for good reasons." She swallowed. "That's what scares me." He nodded because it scared him too. He gripped the drag's front vines and began pulling. The climb out of the ravine was slow. Elias leaned into the work, boots digging into mud, shoulders burning. The drag snagged on roots. Each snag jolted her, and each jolt drew a sound from her that she tried to swallow. She clamped her teeth together until her jaw trembled. At one point she hissed, "Stop!" Elias halted instantly, chest heaving. "What is it?" She stared at the sky through the branches. "When I was small," she said, voice thin, "a hunter caught my brother, not with wire, with his hands." Her fingers tightened on the cloth beneath her. "He broke his arm, setting it wrong on purpose, so he'd always be weak." Elias' throat went tight. "I'm sorry," he said, and meant it in a way that felt like shame. "That hunter said he was helping," she whispered. "He said pain was medicine." Her eyes slid to Elias. "So when you did it, I saw him, I heard my brother." Elias stood there in the mud, the drag rope cutting into his palms. He didn't know what to say that would not sound like words like nets. So he said the only true thing. "I'm not that hunter." Her gaze sharpened. "How do I know?" "You don't," Elias admitted. "You can't, not from one day." Silence stretched. Wind moved through the trees like a sigh. Finally, she spoke, and her voice was small enough to be dangerous. "Why did you help me the first night, when you found me in the snare?" Elias stared at the ground. He could have lied. He could have said because it was right, because he was good. But goodness was too clean a story. She would smell the falsehood like rot. "Because I know what it's like," he said. She waited. Elias lifted his gaze to hers. "My sister," he said. "Years ago, a falling beam, no doctor nearby. I set her arm myself. She called me a monster, too." His mouth twisted. "She didn't mean it the way you do, but she screamed the same." Her eyes softened a fraction, then hardened again. "Did she forgive you?" Elias thought of his sister's face later, pale with pain but alive, and how she'd punched his shoulder with her good hand weeks after, grinning. "Yes," he said, "eventually. And if she hadn't," Elias answered honestly, "I'd still rather she be alive and angry than dead and pleased." For a moment, something in her expression wavered, as if the idea was bitter but solid, like hard bread that still fed you. She swallowed. "Keep pulling," she said, so he did. By the time they reached his cabin, dusk had turned the world blue. The smokeless chimney stood like a finger against the darkening sky. Elias pushed the door open with his shoulder, dragging her inside. Warmth wasn't waiting. He hadn't lit a fire, but the cabin held the day's heat a little, and it smelled of pine sap and dried herbs. He laid the drag beside the hearth. "I'll make fire," he said. She watched him stack wood, strike flint. When flame caught, it painted her face in gold and shadow. Her features looked less like myth and more like a person who'd been hurt too many times. As the room warmed, her shivering eased. Elias poured water into a pot, set it to heat, and tore more cloth for padding. He worked in quiet, letting the crackle of fire fill the space between them. After a while, she spoke, voice hoarse. "When I screamed, I meant it." "I know," Elias said. She stared at her splinted leg. "I didn't want you to be good." Elias' hands paused. "Why?" "Because if you're good," she said slowly, "then I have to wonder if I'm wrong about your kind." She lifted her eyes to him, and there was fear there, but also something like longing. "And if I'm wrong, then all my hatred has nowhere to go." Elias felt the weight of that. Hatred was a shelter, ugly but familiar. Without it, you stood exposed. He nodded once. "You don't have to decide today," he said, her mouth tightened. "You always say that, today, later, tomorrow." "Because healing takes time," he said. "And hurting takes seconds," she whispered. Elias didn't deny it. He moved to kneel beside her again, careful. "I need to check the circulation," he said. "Your toes, the color." She flinched, and he stopped immediately, hands hovering. "Tell me if you want me to." She studied him. The firelight made her eyes look less like voids and more like deep water. "I don't want you to," she said, "but do it." Elias nodded. He touched her foot lightly. Her breath caught, but she didn't pull away. He pressed gently at her toes, watched the color return. "Good. Still good," he said. She let out a shaky breath. "So you didn't take my foot?" "No," Elias said. "Not today." She almost smiled, but it faltered. "Not today," she echoed, and there was both gratitude and suspicion in it. Elias stood and moved to his shelf, pulling down a jar of honey and another of crushed willow bark. "This will help a little," he said, mixing them into warm water. She wrinkled her nose. "Human potions." "Forest potions," he corrected. She took the cup when he offered it, fingers brushing his. Her touch was cold but not recoiling. After she drank, she leaned back against the wall, eyelids heavy. Exhaustion was taking her like a tide. Elias sat on the opposite side of the hearth, giving distance. He didn't want to loom. He didn't want to be the hunter in her story. Minutes passed. The fire settled into a steady glow. Her voice came again, quiet. "Elias." He looked up. If it had stayed crooked, she said, eyes half closed, would I have become like my brother, weak? Yes, Elias said, because lying would poison whatever fragile trust had formed. You would have walked wrong, pain forever, maybe infection, maybe death. Her eyes opened fully. The fear returned, but now it was aimed at the past that almost happened. So you chose the scream. I chose the scream, he said. She swallowed, throat working. Then I chose wrong, she whispered, and the words seemed to cost her. Elias didn't move, didn't pounce on it like victory. He simply said, you chose what you could with what you knew. Her gaze held his. For the first time, the label monster didn't leap to her tongue like reflex. Instead, she said, I'm still angry. I expected that, Elias replied. And I might still hate you tomorrow. Elias nodded. That's allowed. She frowned as if the permission confused her more than any force. Why are you like this? She demanded, weakly fierce. Why do you help when you could just leave me to rot and prove my story's right? Elias stared into the fire. He thought of the village, of loneliness, of the way the forest edge had become both exile and refuge. He thought of finding her in the snare, how her pain had looked too familiar. Finally, he answered, voice low. Because if I don't help, he said, then the monster in the stories wins, and I'm tired of living in other people's tales. She watched him for a long time. The fire popped, sending a tiny spark up like a fleeting star. Then she shifted carefully and winced. Elias tensed, ready to move, but she lifted one hand. Don't, she said. He froze. She touched her own chest, just below the collarbone, fingers pressing lightly as if claiming a space. My name, she said, the words heavy. You asked for yours, you should have mine. Elias felt his heartbeat thump against his ribs. Names were bridges, and bridges could be crossed both ways. Waited, she hesitated, jaw tight with the effort of trust. Then she said, Sable. It fit her, Elias thought, dark-eyed, sharp, a creature that belonged to woods and shadow. Sable, he repeated gently, like setting something fragile down intact. Her eyelids fluttered. If you ever do that again, she murmured, voice fading toward sleep, warn me better. Elias' mouth twitched with something that might have been relief. I'll try. And if I call you monster, she added, almost drowsy, you can. You can still be Elias. I will, he said. Sable's breathing slowed. The anger didn't vanish from her face. It lingered like a storm line on the horizon. But beneath it, something else settled, an uneasy truce with pain, with help, with the fact that sometimes survival required letting another's hands do the terrible, necessary thing. Elias fed another log into the fire and sat back, keeping watch as night pressed against the cabin windows. Outside, the wolves sang to the moon. Inside, the monster and the human, both labels too small, shared the same warmth and the same silence and the thin, stubborn thread of tomorrow.